David, yesterday when we were talking, you just came out with the most outrageous, prejudicial thing about oysters I think I'd ever heard.
Oh, you mean that opinion that I hold along with about 50 million Frenchmen? I think the French not only have the greatest oysters in the world, and when I say that, John, I don't mean they're a little bit better. I mean they're different. I mean, there's nothing like oysters in France. When I eat oysters in the U.S., for me, it's kind of like I'm eating it because it makes me dream of oysters in France. And the whole French culture around oysters is completely superior to our own.
When the Europeans started bringing over oysters from America, there were entire reefs around New York, 200 feet long, nothing but oysters. They brought them over to Europe, and the Frenchmen ate nothing but American. They had their ballons, they had their choice at that time. And American oysters just beat the pants off of everything. 90% of all oysters grown in Europe are American oysters, or as you know.
They're actually Japanese oysters.
They're Japanese.
But in France and in Seattle, in Paris and in Seattle, it tastes like two different oysters. You would not be able to see a similarity between those two oysters. And that's the point. I mean, we can talk about what people liked in various parts of history, but today most French oysters are Pacific oysters. Today most American oysters are either Eastern or Pacific, but both the American Eastern and the American Pacific does not measure up to the Pacific oyster as grown in France. You and I are going to taste, I don't know, 7, 8, 10 different types of oysters today. That's the good part.
Oh, look at this.
But the thing is that
this is rare.
I thought, as you well know,
isn't it beautiful?
Which?
Well, we're about to find out which are which.
Look at these oysters here. You see how many of them have this creamy layer of fat on top? Some don't. We'll talk about that later. But even the
fat, the beauty in it.
To the French, and of course, John, I mean, to each his own. But to the French, that thing is disgusting. When I give that fat to French friends who taste oysters in America, they go, I'm sorry, I cannot eat that. It's dégueulasse. Let's start with these East Coast oysters. This guy is from Rhode Island. Okay. This is the raspberry Point. Now,
I wanted that one.
I want to see whether this is separated from the shell or not. It is. It's cut away from the shell. Now, may I make the point that my... just wait 1 second. My thing about oysters in the U.S. is not just about the oysters themselves. It's about oyster service. In France, they would never, ever cut this away before serving it. They give you a special fork where you can cut it away because the oyster was alive.
The French must love you for your...
The oyster, so simple. Here. The oyster was...
Don't make me stop. No.
Oh, eat it. Did you know that in France, they don't like to serve them when they're 1 to 2 days old? Because they say...
That's probably what these are, about a day. But I'm sorry.
No, let me just make my point. They call that the first water. This is how crazy the French are. They think that the first water is inferior in taste. They say by the 2nd to 3rd day, the oyster develops its own water, le deuxième eau. And that's when they like it at 2 to 3 days. Yes. Now, for me, John, the colder the better for oysters. And as you go up the East Coast and you get to a place like Malpec, Prince Edward Island, which has Malpecs, the oysters get better. Now, this one, may I point out, this is beginning to have the look that a French oyster has. That transparent, kind of congealed seawater look.
David, you want to know my opinion of a French oyster? Here, put this in your mouth. It's all copper and money. Just put your pocket change in.
You're wrong. You're talking about the coppery taste of the Bellon oyster.
I don't like that.
Look at the aftertaste.
You said that.
Look at the aftertaste.
It's just sort of like
nice sea flavor to it.
That's not a sea flavor. That you know what that tastes like. You've used that term before.
Poopy diaper.
Well, this looks promising to me.
But see,
notice how deep that shell is.
Yes, I see. You like the size, but also you see there's fat on this. You see that shred of fat right there? There's fat. It's.
Ooh, this is gonna be a good one.
This might be our compromise oyster. I like this very much.
That's awesome. Now this,
California
Kumamoto, which is usually much smaller.
Don't like it particularly. Too creamy, and Not enough salt.
I'd have this in bed with the right company.
That wouldn't be
is
me.
a good-
Let's point out right away.
You got the wrong shape.
John, here we go, Alaska. You want the juicy one or the non-juicy one?
You like the juice.
I like the juice.
I like the oyster.
Okay, let's go for it. Look at that. And sometimes when you turn,
I envied the size on that one.
Yes, but when you cut a shell, the adductor muscle, and turn the oyster open, it's a magic trick. More juice appears somehow.
That's like butter. That is bliss. I loved everything but the aftertaste on that one.
The aftertaste was the only part I loved. But that's it, John. I mean, it's clear that we come from two different sides of the ocean.
I wouldn't pay this if I were you, David. Come on.